Okay, welcome everyone to our third and final class on the healing power of forgiveness. Let's go ahead and start with the prayers that we usually do, and I will lead everyone in these tonight. Tonight, let's just do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. I do have a fair amount of material to cover, so. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll just do the mandala offering in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then, as usual, the first time we'll do in English, and then we'll recite the verse twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi dola penche sangye dupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi dola penche sangye dupar shok. All right, let's do a short meditation as usual. First few minutes focusing on the breath to calm the mind, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's class. So we can go ahead and begin now. So to set our motivation for tonight, we can recall how one of the most important teachings in which our practice of forgiveness is rooted is the teachings on compassion. We touched on this 2 weeks ago. We also touched on it briefly last week in our motivation. Let's add some additional thoughts to this understanding. In Master Shantideva's 6th chapter, when he works with techniques for developing patience, he puts forth the question of whether it's in the nature of sentient beings to cause harm to others, to have these afflictions, anger, and so on. To do things that harm us and for us to do things that harm others. Is it in the nature of beings to do those things, to have those states of mind? And of course, if we look at it from the point of view of that being the nature of sentient beings, that their very nature is to have anger or resentment of others and so on, which of course isn't the case. But even if we were to say that that were the case, well, then our anger towards them or our lack of forgiveness would really not be grounded in anything, because that's the very nature of these beings. There's really, in a sense, nothing to forgive, because that is simply who these beings are. But of course, as I said, this is really not the case. Sentient beings are not having minds in the nature of harming others, resenting others, being spiteful towards others, and so on. These things are adventitious. They reside in the mind due to causes and conditions. They're not in the very nature of mind. So all these beings that we are observing when we're engaging in this study of forgiveness, ourselves included, it's not our very nature to do these harmful things to others. We do them because of causes and conditions. And of course, those causes and conditions can be changed. We all have Buddha nature, pure minds that can be free of everything that currently defiles them. Those defilements are not in the nature of mind. The nature of mind is purity, is clarity. So we can inform our practice of forgiveness with this understanding and generate compassion for beings, because they are under the control of these factors in the same way that we ourselves are. But we can also inform our bodhicitta motivation with this understanding, recognizing that our desire to become a Buddha is founded in that reality, that we can free our minds of everything that defiles them, all the obscurations, and all beings can also do the same. So when we devote ourselves to becoming a Buddha, to lead all beings to that same state, it's grounded in reality, grounded in what is actually possible, not some pipe dream. So generate this mind of bodhicitta within that understanding, rededicating yourself to the practice of a bodhisattva, treating all beings with love and compassion, developing our own minds so we can help them to do the same. And then you can open your eyes fully, and we'll start tonight's class. So I wanted to just talk a little bit more. It felt like it was kind of rushed at the end of last week, talking about apologizing a bit. I wanted to just revisit also what Anne Marie, I was hoping she would be here tonight, but she had brought up this query around, having a neighbor who was accusing her of doing something that she didn't do, and he had become so bothersome. I assume it was a he. I think it was a he anyway, that she was putting forward the question, well, maybe I should just apologize to him anyway, just to kind of resolve the situation and move forward. I was kind of keen on putting forward, what is our bodhisattva ethic, which is at times we may need to engage in behavior that would otherwise look inappropriate, such as telling a lie in order to, help a being that is in distress or what have you. We have to be careful with this. I don't want to make it sound like that's blanket advice that we always follow. We just start lying to everybody left and right. I mean, our fundamental morality stays the same. We have to avoid the 10 non virtues as best as we can. Those rare cases are actually there when bodhisattvas, or beings who are aspiring on the Mahayana path, do see that there's an opportunity through their behavior to do something that will be a benefit. Remember I didn't bring this one up last week, but the ship captain story about when the Buddha was a bodhisattva in charge of a ship of merchants that were on their way back from this voyage to get all these goods. And through his clairvoyance, he could tell that one of the merchants was going to kill all the others, 499 other merchants, and then, take all of the goods for himself. And of course, out of the Buddha's well, again, he was a bodhisattva at the time, but out of the Buddha's compassion for this being who was going to engage in all of this, as well as those he was going to cause harm to, he decided to take the life of that being and keep him from harming other beings. So again, there's very rare cases where the Buddha in his past lives would even allude to doing these sorts of things. So we have to treat it somewhat, with some caution. We don't always know what's going to happen. We don't always know the consequences of our actions, but our motivations tend to be the most important thing. That's why I emphasized last week, if your motivation is really quite pure, it's quite compassionate, and you believe through your own knowledge of the situation that things will improve for the better. So if in Anne-Marie's case, if she knows that, telling this neighbor because of past relationships she's had with him, that this may smooth things over and that there may be more harmony and lack of, the distrust will go away and what have you, well, then maybe that is a good thing to do. But she does have to recognize that she has to face the consequences of that. If the neighbor gets really upset when she says, oh, yes, after all, I am the one who did that, when she wasn't, well, the neighbor may really, cause her more harm and end up engaging in more negativity. And then that wouldn't be good for the neighbor to do. But of course, Anne Marie as well would have to be ready to face the consequences of that, having, a neighbor now that is perhaps more inflamed at her because he's found out that she did something that he thought she did all along, and now she's finally admitting to. So, I mean, it's a quite complex situation. I hope I gave a little bit of that flavor as well last week around making sure that we really think through these things. And as I said, everything is very situation specific. You can't give this kind of general advice and say, oh, just because I have a good motivation, I can do whatever I want. That's not what these teachings are saying. They're simply saying that there may be occasions where we might have to break the basic precepts of Buddhism and the basic behavior for a greater good, for something that and again, this was the story when the ship's captain story was told. The whole idea was that as that bodhisattva, he was happy to take on the negative karma of killing this being in order to keep that being from engaging in that misbehavior. So we have to have that willingness to say, okay, I will take on the negative karma of telling a lie or of taking a life or whatever it might be. So it's a really pretty high stakes thing, you know. Nonetheless, there are teachings, as I mentioned last week as well, in Lojong, where we're encouraged to kind of, as I said, give the victory to others. Along those lines, I wanted to share one more thing that I hope, again, Anne Marie, maybe she'll get a chance to listen into this and hear. We don't necessarily even have to say that we did a particular thing. Remember the story of the golf balls? I think most of you have heard the story of the golf balls, where the neighbor was really, causing all kinds of problems for the man, and the man eventually went over there to appease him. He had this gift of golf balls because he knew the man really liked to golf, and they were the nicest golf balls he could imagine and whatever. And so he goes and knocks on the door and he hands them to the man and he says, I apologize for anything I've ever done to harm you. And you can make a kind of blanket apology like that. That doesn't have to be so specific. That just kind of tries to clear the air and offering a gift to the person or whatever. And that probably would have been better advice for me to give last Thursday as well, because again, it doesn't necessarily involve any type of lying. It just says, if there's anything I have ever done to harm you that I know of or don't know of, I am apologizing for it and trying to make good with this gift of reparation, to you. And I think that may be a more, amenable way to go about doing something like that, rather than getting into the, oh, well, you did do that and all this kind of back and forth that could happen. Instead, this is just taking the high road, saying, I'm going to be the adult in the room and I'm going to come forward with an apology and put it out there and make some sort of offering of reparation. Whether or not I've done anything, karmically, you must have done something, or that being wouldn't be doing that to you. So this is again just another way that I thought about it afterwards that I think would have been perhaps at least good to mention in addition, if not maybe to rely upon that sort of a solution. Because once more, you don't know what's going to happen once you admit to doing something that somebody has accused you of that you've already denied. Because then they're like, well, now you're denying it. I don't know. I think you could have a lot of problems with that. So I don't know. Were there any questions or comments on that? Because I didn't want to make it sound so flippant, like you can just do whatever you want, but rather to make sure that once more it's a very thought out process and know that there are other ways of approaching it too that don't have to be so specifically taking the blame upon oneself, but actually, just being more conciliatory with another person and doing what you can to smooth over the relationships in that way. So, anything? Okay. Good. Well, I'm glad that I was able, because I've been thinking about it ever since. Well, not ever since then, but occasionally, kind of my mind going to it, and I realized, of course, that I just didn't want there to be any misunderstandings in regard to that. That is behavior that and I think even one of the Bodhisattva vows, the secondary vow, says that if you're in a place where you can do something like that, and even though it goes against some basic ethical principles, that you have to do that. That is part of our ethic. But again, we have to be able to understand all the ramifications of it to some degree. We can't just go willy-nilly doing whatever we want to do. So I don't know if there was anything more on appreciation or on apologizing. Sorry, and why I said appreciation. Apologizing. Again, the last thing, whoops, that we looked at was these 4 steps, 4 components. Again, not to say that every apology has all 4 of these, but again, to acknowledge the specific offense if possible. Again, what I just pointed out to you was maybe not doing that as specifically, but certainly putting forward an understanding that we may have done something that really angered or upset that person. And, we accept responsibility. We show empathy and offer an explanation for why we did what we did. Again, if appropriate. Don't feel like, again, you have to justify what you did. Rather, give some context for why you did what you did, if that's, part of the apology. Expressing remorse, shame, humility, and sincerity, and recognizing how the victim suffered. This helps because it means that you are identifying with the person as someone who has been hurt by you. And you are acknowledging that they are in a superior position at that point because you are the one who has offended them. And then offering compensation or reparation. And I know that there was a question about that as well, about what form that takes. It is good if there is the possibility to, offer something to them from your side, but there's always that, kind of bit open-ended thing that you may need to negotiate at some point, but to say to the person, how can I make things better for you? I realize that this has harmed you and caused you a lot of suffering. Is there something I can do to, make amends to you? And as long as you're willing to kind of discuss that with them, maybe what they put forward isn't really, doable. You're not going to buy them a new home in the Caribbean islands or something. That's not on the table. But something that they put forward, and that always really helps. I mean, I know I've had cases where someone has apologized to me and they've made no mention of that, and I didn't call anyone on it. I just don't feel like that's part of my ethic, is to make sure people get to that point of wanting to offer me reparations. But it feels a little hollow. It feels a little bit like, well, okay, you're sorry that you did what you did and you admit that it's wrong and da da da, but you're not willing to do anything more to make good on it, to reverse it in some way if you can. I mean, again, if you can't reverse it because the cat's already out of the bag, well, then at least something that will make the other person feel better, something that will be, again, conciliatory towards them. So I do think it's important that we have that component at least expressed. Sometimes when we say that to somebody and we're apologizing, we say, was there anything I can do to make things better? And they might say, well, no, you've done enough by apologizing. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Deal done. I think what is important that really wasn't mentioned there, although I think we did touch on it a little bit when we talked about apology, is assuring the person that it's not going to happen again to the best of our ability. I think that's one of the things too that gets people, when you have people who constantly apologize, oh, I'm so sorry I did this to you, and then they do it again, and then they do it again. Apologies don't mean so much. They're very hollow if we don't make some sort of agreement that we're going to refrain from that behavior. So, again, that's a little bit more that I wanted to say on apology before going on to tonight's topic, which is the last of the three levels of forgiveness. Kind of maybe the main one at some level, but the other two, as I explain, are really necessary to forgive ourselves and to be in that mode of seeking forgiveness of others. And if that can happen in reality, if we can meet with those individuals and express our remorse and apologize, that's great. But there may be situations again where it's only happening in a meditation, like the Jack Kornfield meditation that I've been using as the basis for this course. So any questions up to this point before we move on to, yes, Stella, please unmute. Mhm. Oh, you're still muted. Sorry. You're, yeah,
Okay. It's
there you go.
it's interesting that you hit upon the concern that I had that I was going to talk to you about tonight. So
Oh, okay.
you hit it right on the nail. But um, so why, if you go through those steps
Hmm.
and you apologize for, maybe repeating something that you heard them say, and they did do it, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that there's no communication, and the fact that uh, the person I'm talking about is my sister-in-law, so that my ex-sister-in-law. So it's like I'm sort of still involved with their family, so that makes it uncomfortable, because
Sure.
she I don't know if she wants to discuss it or not, but like cut all communication with me,
Mm.
and so anyway, but why, if that person doesn't
Mm.
want to accept your, what you've
Yeah.
said, whatever I've done, or I can't remember the exact words,
Right.
to upset you or whatever, I apologize, and you still get no closure on that, then are you, like, is it okay from your end? I mean, because I actually pray for her in my practice, and then that's
That's
all I
true.
think I can do.
Well, I mean, in terms of the process of forgiveness, I think it's complete when we've expressed the heartfelt apology and again tried to make whatever reparations we can for what we have done in, again, whether it's possible to do that. Whether the person accepts the apology is really in their court, and some people may want to hold on to their hot coal, as we talked about earlier, and they're not willing to let it go because we know what that feels like. People like that in some sense. It gives them a sense of power over the person who offended them in some way, but it's not leading to any beneficial result for them. In terms of karmically, again, we do have to go back to the four opponent powers, making sure that we do what we can to purify the ways that we've misused our speech through, again, talking about someone else in another, saying things to someone else that might have been divisive or not wanting to be shared or whatever. All those sorts of things need to be purified. And when we purified our karma and we've apologized, I think we've done everything we can. The other person has to make their own decision. And if they decide that they can't let go of it and they want to hold on to it and they want to keep a wall between you and them, you have to accept that. And you just have to, like you said, I think it's great that you're praying for her and wanting her to find peace and be free of, resentment that she's holding on to and whatever. And that's great. That's all we can do at times. But if you've cleared it up sort of karmically and you've done everything you need to do, then I don't know that there's really much more that you can. You know, maybe there's a way to have a like the gift of golf balls that I talked about earlier. Maybe there's a way to extend something to her with that more kind of general apology that doesn't have to be specifically about this, but just saying, I've been thinking about you a lot, and I really want to apologize for anything I've ever done to harm you, and please accept this gift as a token of my sincere apology or whatever, sincere regret. And then just again, that story of the golf balls, as we remember, it ends really nicely because the neighbor comes over and is very apologetic as well. But that's not how it always ends. We have to
Yeah,
be, willing to accept the fact that some people aren't going to want to let go of that.
right.
So do what we can. And
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
Thanks, Stella, for sharing that. I know that's been a source of pain for you and difficulty. So,
Yeah, like I said, it was funny that you mentioned it because that's what I wanted to talk to you about if you would come over tonight.
uh,
Anyway, thank you.
thanks for bringing it up. And yeah, I hope that find a way to have more resolution. But again, if the resolution doesn't occur, there's not much we can do. We can't force someone else to let go of their resentment or whatever's going on for
And
them.
when it's got it when it's like sort of family, then it even makes it harder, I think, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look at how many people go through like a good portion of their life mad at a sibling or someone else in their family and don't even let it go on their deathbed. It's like
Right.
at that moment when you're just wanting to exit with somewhat of a clean slate, I would think. Maybe people don't think that way that much, but I don't know. Seems like it would happen, but it doesn't happen sometimes then even. So
But
what to
yeah,
do?
on the other side of that, I have something I think I did discuss with you once that my nephew, who I loved
Mhm.
dearly, still love,
Mhm.
um, was so upset that I was a Buddhist because his mother is very Catholic, you know, and
Right.
and they're very Catholic, and on top of that, he has a drinking problem. So he called me one day, and obviously he had been drinking, and he said, "I just want you to know that you're going to go to hell for being a Buddhist." You know, and I said, "Who is this? Is this my nephew?" And he said, "Yes, this is your nephew, and you're going to go to hell." Anyway, it
Yeah.
was almost comical because now that I look back on it, but it was very upsetting to me that he said that.
Sure.
So I said, Gabriel, I really don't want to talk to you about this, and you know, especially because I didn't say I knew he had been drinking, but that's what I meant, you know.
Mhm.
So 2 years went by, and about a month and a half ago, he called me
Oh, really?
and he said, uh, Tia, he calls me Tia. I just want to tell you that I apologize for what I said to
Oh,
you. I was totally out of line, and
mhm.
I just want to say I'm sorry. And I was so happy to hear from him. And I said, Gabriel, you don't know how that makes me happy to hear you say that.
How
You
beautiful.
know, I think again, he didn't know how I was going to react, you know, but
Mhm.
it really turned out good, you know. So on the other side of that, you know,
Yeah.
it was a good
Well,
outcome.
I'm so happy. Thank you for sharing that because I
Yeah.
know that too caused you a lot of pain and difficulty. So glad to hear there was resolution to that. And let's hope that, yeah, that's a behavior he'll learn to not do again. So, oh, uh, anyway. But
But
we all do it. That's the thing is, we might not have said that thing in this life, but we know we've said it in other lifetimes where we've been that cruel or mean to somebody. Yeah.
right. But anyway, so you
Yeah.
know, you can see it from both sides. You
Yeah. No, and that's what I like doing this course. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to do this little 3 sessions on forgiveness because, as I said, the first class, we don't talk about it as much in Buddhism, but also it's just something that people don't talk about that much in general in life. Like most people just kind of wing it. And again, we're not really taught that much about forgiveness. We're taught more about forgiveness than apologizing, but apologizing, as we saw, that's also a whole nother art. But you do see, I mean, it sounded like from what you shared, Stella, that even just getting his apology was enough. He didn't need to say, "Oh, how could I make it up to you,
know,
Tia?"
no,
It feels good enough to just get that and to clear the air and to know
was
that you're
happy
back at
because I
peace.
realized that
Yeah,
he had been
yeah,
really suffering with
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
you know, so I was happy that he could unload it and that I could accept it, and
Good,
now we can move on, you know. And
good, good.
anyway, so
Thanks so much, Stella.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Anyone else? Anything from what we've talked about so far in the course? So tonight is, as I said, kind of the big one in a sense, forgiving others who have harmed us. Let's go back to the slides real quickly. And again, This is the whole outline for the course. We're into the part on the practice, these three levels of practice: forgiveness for ourselves, we talked about 2 weeks ago, asking forgiveness of others and apologizing last week, and then cultivating forgiveness for those who have hurt or harmed you is tonight. And then we'll conclude with just a little few comments on making forgiveness your life's practice. So, again, this is the third level. What's the nature of forgiveness for others who have harmed me? This is also on your handout, but this is a nice little recap of 5 points from Jack Kornfield in his little book called The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness, and Peace. Number one, forgiveness is not weak or naive. Forgiveness requires courage and clarity. It is not naive. Mistakenly, people believe that to forgive is to simply forgive and forget once and for all. That is not the wisdom of forgiveness. I wanted to share here a little story, but let me just talk about this first. I mean, I think a lot of people see that when people forgive, and maybe even sometimes people might forgive a little too easily. I remember when there was the shooting at the Mother Emanuel Church down in South Carolina, where the white guy came into the black congregation when they were having like their kind of Sunday school meeting and killed so many of them. And the very next day, one of the church members was before the camera saying that she forgave the killer. And when we hear things like that, we almost think that it's too soon. There wasn't enough process. It wasn't heartfelt enough to give a level of forgiveness the day after a horrendous shooting like that. But I think, again, everyone's going to practice it very differently and depends upon their own strength of forgiveness that they have generated. So it's not to say that that wasn't heartfelt, but for most of us, it's a real act of courage to forgive. It's not weakness at all. And someone might look at somebody who forgives in the next moment and think they're just being weak and not wanting to be entangled with others or whatever. But there's great strength when you actually are able to go deep into your own pain and see what has happened to you, acknowledge it, and process through it and come out the other side with a mind that is willing to forgive and willing to even care for the other people in ways that, are quite outstanding. We do see this in our world on occasion. I wanted to share, as I've written on the screen there, I put in some little reminders for me to make sure that I do share a couple of things that I wanted to share with you tonight, because the stories are always so much more impactful than me just going blah, blah, blah. But Jack Kornfield in that book, same book, has this wonderful story of a man that he ran into. He says, once on the train from Washington to Philadelphia, I found myself seated next to an African American man who had worked for the State Department in India, but had quit to run a rehabilitation program for juvenile offenders in the District of Columbia. Most of the youths that he worked with were gang members who had committed homicide. One 14-year-old boy in his program had shot and killed an innocent teenager to prove himself to his gang. At the trial, the victim's mother sat impassively silent until the very end, when the youth was convicted of the killing. After the verdict was announced, she stood up slowly and stared directly at him and stated, "I'm going to kill you." Then the youth was taken away to serve several years in the juvenile facility. After the first half year, the mother of the slain child went to visit his killer. He had been living on the streets before the killing, and she was the only visitor that he'd had. For a time they talked, and when she left, she gave him some money for cigarettes. Then she started step by step to visit him more regularly, bringing food and small gifts. Near the end of his 3-year sentence, she asked him what he would be doing when he got out. He was confused and very uncertain, so she offered to set him up with a job at a friend's company. Then she inquired about where he would live, and since he had no family to return to, she offered him temporary use of the spare room in her home. For 8 months he lived there, ate her food, and worked at the job. Then one evening, she called him into the living room to talk. She sat down opposite him and waited. And then she started, "Do you remember in the courtroom when I said I was going to kill you?" I sure do, he replied. Well, I did, she went on. I did not want the boy who could kill my son for no reason to remain alive on this earth. I wanted him to die. That's why I started to visit you and bring you things. And that's why I got you the job and let you live here in my house. That's how I set about changing you. And that old boy, he's gone. So now I want to ask you, since my son is gone and that killer is gone, if you'll stay here. I've got room and I'd like to adopt you if you let me. And she became the mother of her son's killer, the mother that he never had. When I first read that story, I was kind of blown away. And we tend to think those things are kind of impossible, but this is a perfect example to me of how strong it takes to get to a place of forgiveness. It takes an incredible strength. You can't just say again that I forgive you. I mean, those three words are powerful words in and of themselves, but the actions are going to speak much louder, obviously. And her actions were ones of, again, nurturing and caring and compassion. And again, most of us will probably not be challenged in this life with a situation like this, right? Where we have someone who has killed someone very dear to us, and it's our job to find forgiveness for that person who's wronged us in such a very hurtful way. But this happens. This is something I completely believed it when I heard it. I was like, I know that this happens. I had actually heard a similar type of story in California about a woman whose son was killed in a barroom fight, and she ended up befriending and caring for the man who was accused of her son's murder. And it's just it takes a lot to get to that place. Most of us are forgiving others for doing pretty minor things, right? It's not like we're forgiving people for killing someone who is very dear to us. But if we were challenged with such a thing, imagine the strength that it takes. But it takes strength to forgive at whatever level. So I thought that was a good example of this first point, that it's not weak, it's not naive. It has, I mean, look at the wisdom she had, the ability to see what she could do to help change this, to kill the old boy and to bring a new being into this world, in a sense, who is, you know, able to have greater conscience and greater ability to live in this world peacefully. Secondly, forgiveness does not forget, nor does it condone the past. Forgiveness sees wisely. It willingly acknowledges what is unjust, harmful, and wrong. It bravely recognizes the sufferings of the past and understands the conditions that brought them about. I mentioned this earlier when we talked about kind of the whole thing of interdependence and seeing beings through the lens of having greater compassion because we understand the causes and conditions that bring about their particular behavior. And I mentioned the story that was in the book called "The Power of Forgiveness" by Victor Chan, where he's interviewing the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama talks about the young Tibetan boy. I might remember the story, who was being beaten by the Chinese guards because of what his father had done, being part of the Tibetan resistance. And His Holiness giving this understanding of the interdependence that led to that Chinese guard doing this, inflicting this pain on this Tibetan boy. I mean, he's not condoning it in any way, but he's giving an understanding of it. And this is the thing, is we can't forget that this is what's going on in our world. People engage in these horrible behaviors because of the causes and conditions that lead them to do those things. You don't do it independently. And so everything that's going on in our world, and those who find objection with our current administration, I don't want to assume that everybody's in that category, but nonetheless, if you are finding objection, put that understanding into place. Understand that people make decisions and engage in behaviors on the basis of causes and conditions that lead them to do that. As I was saying in the motivation, those causes and conditions are not in concrete. They can be changed. That's once more a reason for us to have compassion, because we understand beings suffer because of these causes and conditions. The whole chain of why we are in this state of samsara and why we are suffering is due to causes and conditions. Change the causes and conditions, you change the situation. That's the whole logic of Buddhism, and that's the understanding that we need to maintain at all times. So forgiveness is very much an act that is grounded in not forgetting and not having some kind of just, oh, it's no big deal, no big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's really embracing the idea that sentient beings do these behaviors. They harm us. They harm others. They kill women's children. They do whatever, all these various actions because of causes and conditions. And we have to have that understanding and not really forget. I mean, even that story of the woman I just shared, she wasn't forgetting what this young man had done to her son. In fact, she was remembering it every day, but remembering it in a way where she was motivated by compassion for him and an understanding that if she kept that at the focus to make sure that he was given the kindness and compassion that he needed to change the causes and conditions, then he would potentially change. Again, a nice story because it ended in that nice way. Maybe they don't all work out that way if people do put themselves out there for someone who has harmed them. But that's the understanding we have to have, that if we tend to it in a way that has that, you know, um, not forgetting what's going on, acknowledging what is unjust, what is wrong, and wanting to work with it, wanting to do what we can to affect it. There is a strength to forgiveness, he continues. When we forgive, we can also say, never again will I allow these things to happen. We may resolve to never again permit such harm to come to ourselves or another. So this is a part of it too, is that, we do have to recognize that saying never again is a wise thing, right? To say, okay, that we're going to do what we can to move forward and to rectify the situation, but this cannot happen again. This is it. This is the test. And it doesn't mean then that you push that person out of your heart if they do that again, if they do offend again and do the same thing, then you don't, write them off completely and say, I'm only going to have hatred and resentment towards that person. You would still have that immense compassion. But maybe you acknowledge that at that point, there's not a willingness to work. There's not a desire to move forward in a more positive way. And until there's some shift in that, well, maybe it is best. We're going to see this a little later when I introduce you briefly to the fourfold path of forgiveness that Desmond Tutu and his daughter set out in their book on forgiving. But the idea is that there is a point sometimes in relationships where we do have to draw the line. And I've mentioned this previously. Some people may even want to draw the line with us, when we go and we apologize to them and say, oh, I'm sorry, I said that about you or whatever. And they might say, well, I accept your apology, but I really don't think we can be friends because of what you did. And you have to say, okay, I acknowledge that. The ball was in your court and you made that decision. And maybe that's the best thing, because if there isn't that trust and that confidence in each other, well, then maybe it is best to have, a parting of the ways. So again, we have to kind of work with that. There's a little story I wanted to share here from Edith Eva Egger, I think is how her name is pronounced. She's really amazing. I don't know if you've ever read the book. I know I've mentioned it to some of you before, called The Choice. Embrace the Possible. It's a wonderful biography of hers. She's a Holocaust survivor, and she was a Hungarian girl, teenage girl, when she was taken into the concentration camps. And she talks about, that whole situation in much of what she shares in her public talks and in the book. And I want to just read these first two paragraphs. I don't know if I need to read all of this, but she says here, people ask me, how did you learn? Let me actually see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Maybe that didn't do it bigger, but it's probably good enough. People ask me, how did you learn to overcome the past? Overcome. I haven't overcome anything. Every beating, bombing, and selection line. The selection lines, of course, where they would determine you're going to the gas chambers, you're going out to the fields to work or whatever. Every death, every column of smoke pushing skyward, every moment of terror when I thought it was the end. These live on in me, in my memories and my nightmares. So this is her really speaking to the not forgetting. She can't forget it. It's a part of the fabric of who she is. The past isn't gone, she says. It isn't transcended or excised. It lives on in me. But so does the perspective it has afforded me, that I live to see liberation because I kept hope alive in my heart, that I live to see freedom because I learned to forgive. Forgiveness isn't easy, I tell them. It is easier to hold grudges, to seek revenge. I tell of my fellow survivors, the courageous men and women I met in Israel, who looked pained when I mentioned forgiveness, who insisted that to forgive is to condone or to forget. Why forgive? Doesn't that let Hitler off the hook for what he did? Maybe I will share the rest of this. She's really quite amazing in what she shares. I tell of my dear friend Lacey Gladstein, Larry Gladstone, I guess he changed his name coming to the US, and the single time in the decade since the war when he spoke to me explicitly about the past. It was during my divorce when he knew money was a struggle for me. He called to say that he knew of a lawyer representing survivors in reparations cases. He encouraged me to step forward as a survivor to claim my due. That was the right choice for many, but not for me. It felt like blood money, as if one could put a price on my parents' heads, a way to stay chained to those who had tried to destroy us. It is too easy to make a prison out of our pain, out of the past. At best, revenge is useless. It can't alter what was done to us. It can't erase the wrongs we suffered. It can't bring back the dead. At worst, revenge perpetuates the cycle of hate. It keeps the hate circling on and on. When we seek revenge, even nonviolent revenge, we are revolting. I'm sorry, revolving, not evolving. Revolting is it is revolting and they're not revolting. We are revolving, not evolving, revolving in our anger, revolving in our feelings of revenge. So, but you know, it took a lot, I'm sure, for her as a Holocaust survivor to get to a place where she was forgiving in her heart those who had done this. But like she said, it doesn't mean for a second she doesn't forget that they did these wrongs. I mean, it would have been wrong if Hitler had survived, and had been prosecuted of all of this. Of course, they probably would have put him to death. There probably wouldn't have been any question. But if he had gotten to a place where, perhaps could see and feel the forgiveness that people were extending to him, it doesn't mean that then they say, oh, Hitler's just fine. He'll be a good boy when he is kind of left out on his own. You may have to still use very great caution around people because of the things that they've done. So we have to have that understanding again that it doesn't mean forgetting. It means, a very profound act of shifting our own minds, getting to a place where we can, let go of that hurt, that pain that we carry around and not cycle in revenge. Also, forgiveness does not happen quickly. Another point that Jack Kornfield makes for great injustice, coming to forgiveness may include a long process of grief, outrage, sadness, loss, and pain. True forgiveness does not paper over what has happened in a superficial way. It is not a misguided effort to suppress or ignore our pain. And this is the one thing, again, to emphasize, particularly if you have experienced things that are very challenging for you in your life. I mean, there are many people who obviously have been, victims of abuse at some point or another in their lives, whether it was as a child or even in adult life. Those things can be very hard to heal from. So again, do the work that you need to do. Don't feel like you're just going to paper over it and say, oh, Buddhism teaches you should forgive, and then I need to just forgive and get on with it. Maybe you've processed enough to be at that point, but many people haven't. I mean, a lot of people don't even acknowledge the pain that has occurred to them. And so they're still dealing with a lot of trauma that is not manifest yet and that has not even been brought to the surface yet. And recall that I mentioned earlier that it's a physical process often too, that when you release more trauma through these processes, you can even release a lot in the body that can be sources of illness or problems, difficulties physically as well. So recognize that it's important to take the time to not think I've got to rush to forgiveness because it's really important and gloss over, all these other points. Invest in whatever grief, loss work that you have to engage in. Certainly, if you are somebody who's experienced some form of abuse, there are support groups for people who have gone through that. Hopefully those groups don't become, I don't think they do, but hopefully they don't become a place for purely venting anger and perpetuating anger. They become a place where forgiveness can be possible. But know that, that's the goal of that. If you haven't expressed it and kind of gone through it, it's kind of hard to get to the other side. You're just going to do that thing that, again, we often call spiritual bypassing, right? John Wellwood coined this term where you just kind of jump over all the work you need to do to get to some other kind of higher ideal. Oh, I want to be the bodhisattva who's all forgiving and compassionate and kind and walks around like St. Francis in the woods or something. Well, that's a nice ideal, but we're maybe not ready to jump to that if we haven't done the deeper work to process our own stuff and get through what we need to be kind of the person who can become that. This is the term that he coined for that, which I think is very relevant in the West. You have a tendency to come into these spiritual paths and think that there's something really idyllic about these results of being this bodhisattva and this great being in the world. But if you don't do the work to get there, particularly that some of the more psychological, Western psychology kind of work, then it's very hard to just kind of jump over those things, and they're going to surface again at some point. They're not going to be dealt with. So again, this is an important thing. If you're curious about this term, John Welwood, Welwood, wrote a book called Toward a Psychology of Awakening. I think I've mentioned it before in classes in Taos. Continuing, he says, it cannot be hurried. Forgiveness is a deep process repeated over and over in our heart, which honors the grief and betrayal, and in its own time ripens into the freedom to truly forgive. Again, be careful that you're not wallowing in your grief and betrayal and all those feelings. This is not what it's about. It's not to make you kind of stew in it to where you just totally takes you over. It's to acknowledge that you have to get through it. I think there's a wonderful analogy that David, what is his name now? Can't think of his last name. He worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on developing the 5 stages of grief, which are similar to the 5 stages of dying. And in his book, David, I want to say Keltner or something, but I can't. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not forgetting or remembering his name correctly. He writes about this pattern that they've noticed, a behavior of the bison, the buffalo in Montana, and that when there's a huge storm coming, they don't move away from it, they go towards it. And the idea is that if you go through it, you come out the other side sooner. If you run away from it, it catches up with you and you spend more time in it because you're continually running away from it, and it kind of stays with you. So it's a similar thing, right? If we don't go through some level of pain, difficulty, suffering to acknowledge what has happened to us in this process of forgiving, then we're still kind of in it. We're not moving through it. We're not processing it. We're not getting to the other side where the air is a bit clearer, where the clouds have moved away a bit so we can see the possibility of forgiveness. So anyway, this is just reiterating that third point around making sure that we take the time. Be careful not to wallow in it, but nonetheless, it is part of the process to really give it the time it takes. The fourth one, forgiveness does not mean that we have to continue to relate to those who have done us harm. As I mentioned, it's here. It's also in the other process that Desmond Tutu and his daughter put forward. This is, there may be a need to relinquish the relationship and to not restore it because it may not be healthy for you or the other person. In some cases, he says, the best practice may be to end our connection, to never speak to or be with a harmful person again. Sometimes in the process of forgiveness, a person who hurt or betrayed us may wish to make amends, but even this does not require us to put ourselves in the way of further harm. So again, to Stella's story earlier, even if she were to, go forward to her sister-in-law and make some additional amends or whatever, that's not an obligation on the part of her sister-in-law to restore the relationship. That may not be what she's able to do. Everyone's got their own process around this, and we need to honor that process. But from our side, if we're at a place where we're finally willing to forgive another, there may be good justification to not restore the relationship. I mean, especially if we're talking about cases of abuse, and say someone was in a case of parental abuse where a father or mother was abusing them physically, verbally, even sexually, they may not want to be in that relationship again because it's too difficult. The pain is too raw still at some level, and also may not be that conducive to a healthy relationship. It may be, may not be, but if that is the case, then that's a decision that needs to be honored and made. Is to say, okay, I can't restore the relationship with you. I forgive you for what you did, but I really don't think we should be in communication. And it's perfectly fine to put that out there. Again, don't, in Buddhist terms, of course, we want to make sure, as I said earlier, don't put them out of your heart. Don't think, well, this means I'm never going to have compassion for them. I'm never going to have loving thoughts towards them. Keep those up, like Stella's prayers for her sister-in-law. Keep those prayers coming, because we need to hold them in that light of wanting things to be good for them, wanting them to be free from their suffering, wanting them to be happy. That's what all of our spiritual path in the Mahayana is based on. So continue to do those practices, but recognize that it doesn't mean you have to be in the same room with that person, that you have to have, the holidays with them or whatever the case might be. All right. Let me go through the fifth one and then we'll check in on questions or comments. In the end, he says, forgiveness simply means never putting another person out of our heart, which is a segue from what I just said, right? Forgiveness is a process of letting go of our own anger or resentment towards someone who has harmed us, in this case, in this third level of forgiveness. And it means that we still have to keep our heart open to that being because of the understanding I've been speaking of. The fact that this is not innately who this being is. They're not some sort of horrible, harmful, awful person 100% down to the bone. That and their entire mind is only contaminated by those negative traits. Everything is changeable. Everything is, just dependent upon the causes and conditions that are manifesting in that particular time. We've been that awful person that has harmed others because that's why we went through the first part of the process. The first two steps is to acknowledge the ways that we've been, the miserable person that caused somebody else, to have a bad day or whatever. So if we've done it, well, then we've been that same person that is now inflicting harm on us or has done that in the past. So again, this is just as we would not want someone to shut their hearts towards us, we have to keep our hearts open towards others within the understanding that Buddhism puts forward. I know a lot of, again, we don't have that same understanding in all spiritual traditions. It's unfortunate. I was really heartened going back to the Mother Emanuel Church, where these women came forward the very next day and were like, "We forgive this killer. This is what our religion teaches us, and this is what we practice." And they put it out there. And it felt pretty genuine to me. I wasn't making it sound like it wasn't genuine, but a lot of people can look at that and say, how can they possibly be willing to forgive when they haven't even processed the pain, of having members of their own community shot in cold blood? Pretty horrific thing to go through. But it's possible if one has developed a forgiving heart and really has it grounded in faith and in devotion to these principles. I think it's quite possible to be able to forgive pretty easily. But again, it does require some level of practice. We're going to talk about that, in the last point that we get to in this little course on forgiveness. So let me check in and see reactions or thoughts about those five points that Jack Kornfield raises. I can put them on the screen in the little handout just to have them all in front of you. They're all right. Oops, here. Oops, yeah. I got to go up a little bit. There we go. Forgiveness is not weak or naive. It does not forget, nor does it condone the past. It doesn't happen quickly. Doesn't mean that we have to continue to relate to those who have done us harm. And in the end, simply means never putting another person out of our heart. Any comments? I think those points are fairly complete in my estimation in terms of, how forgiveness can be framed in a Buddhist context. I mean, I would hope it would be in all spiritual traditions, but, this is a process that we again have to devote ourselves to and engage in meditation, and then of course, if we can actually forgive the other person, if that's a possibility, and if we feel that it is useful, then by all means doing that. This is the actual part of the meditation by Jack Kornfield that pertains to this third step. I'll just read it through really quickly. There are many ways that I have been harmed by others, abused or abandoned, knowingly or unknowingly, in thought, word, or deed. Let yourself picture and remember these many ways. And now, again, I would encourage you to work with maybe one of these at a time. You don't have to think about everything that's ever happened to you. Maybe think about one. Maybe it's one where there's some difficulty in letting go of that or forgiving the other person. Maybe not the most horrific way you've been harmed by another, but at least something that has some power to it. Feel the sorrow you have carried from this past and sense that you can release this burden of pain by extending forgiveness when your heart is ready. And then say to yourself again these affirmations. I now remember the many ways others have hurt or harmed me, wounded me out of fear, pain, confusion, and anger. I have carried this pain in my heart too long. To the extent that I am ready, I offer them forgiveness. To those who have caused me harm, I offer my forgiveness. I forgive you. And then, of course, he makes some of the points here that I've included in all three of these levels. Repeat them until you feel some shift in your heart, a little bit of, movement. Might take a while. Fake it till you make it. Be forgiving of yourself for not being ready to let go and move on. If you see some resistance to forgiving the other person, don't force it. It can be it cannot be artificial. Just be with whatever feeling is there and simply continue the practice. Let the words and images work gradually in their own way. In time, you can make forgiveness meditation a regular part of your life, letting go of the past and opening your heart to each new moment with a wise, loving kindness. So I'm going to share a story here that I saw in a film. I tried to find the film again today. I think I've tried a couple of times. Somewhere along the lines, I was really curious. When I first arrived in Santa Fe back in in 2005, I actually moved down to Santa Fe from Velarde. And I was starting to get involved in a few of the interfaith type of things. And I was aware that at that time, I think they were beginning to put a lot of legislature together around getting rid of the death penalty here in New Mexico, which of course has been abolished in New Mexico, not in our country. Nationwide, there's still a federal death penalty, and there are still quite a few states that have the death penalty. But I was curious about the death penalty and came across a documentary that I believe it was the BBC had done many years ago on the death penalty because they don't have this in England, right? Most civilized countries, dare I say, don't have the death penalty because they've come to understand that this is really a horrific way to go about setting out justice of taking the life of another being, even if they've taken the lives of others. So anyway, you may disagree with that, but I firmly believe in it, that that it's not an appropriate form of punishment that we should have in our society. And in this documentary, they were following people around, and in particular, they had a couple of people who were awaiting execution and one who was actually going to be executed. And so this young man had taken the life of, I think, a woman, and it was either the woman's best friend or sister or something who was coming to watch the execution. They often invite the family in to come and to actually bear witness to the killer of their loved one being killed, or whatever the case might be. This woman was outside the chambers where all this was going to happen. They were waiting to call them all in. And she was talking to the filmmaker. And she was saying, I don't know if I should show you this because you're not supposed to bring anything in. And she reaches in her hand and she pulls out a piece of paper and she unfolds it and it says, I forgive you. And she says, I have this ready to show the killer if he apologizes for what he did. And then she, neatly tucks it back into her pocket so that no one knows it's there. And the filmmaker, of course, they didn't go into the execution or anything. The filmmaker interviews her when she comes out. And he says, so did you get a chance to forgive this man, to, show him the piece of paper? And she says, no, he didn't apologize, so I didn't forgive him. And I got tears in my eyes because this just made me so sad, because I know that we have that feeling that someone needs to apologize to be forgiven. But again, this is a process we do mainly for ourselves. I'm going to talk about that shortly. Forgiveness is something where we let go of the burden we're carrying around. And it can be healing for the other person. Even if the other person hasn't apologized, imagine the impact it might have had for them to be seeing as one of their last things leaving this world, one of the victim's relatives holding up a piece of paper that says, I forgive you. I mean, we don't know the impact of our actions on others and can't be guaranteed that's going to happen. But I feel that it was very painful for me to hear that this young woman didn't take that opportunity to extend that forgiveness, regardless of what the killer said or did. Again, some of you may disagree with me on that. I'm not, speaking like I've got all the answers on all of this, because I know that when I've never been in that situation. I've never had anybody near me who was, close to me, who was killed or harmed in a great way by another person. But yeah, Eloise, please share.
We had a in the crew of people that were working on this house over the last couple of years, we had a really interesting guy who had been in a number of wars. He was
Mm.
old enough, I think he had been in Vietnam and he had been in Afghanistan. He'd been in the Middle East for a couple of other deployments. He'd
Good
spent
Lord.
a lot of time doing, some pretty terrible things.
Sure.
And he said when people would say to him, "Thank you for your service," it
Mm.
meant nothing. But one person said to him, "I forgive you." And he said he just burst into tears. And it
Mm.
was the a, an enormous event in his life for the
Wow.
strangers forgiving.
Mm. That's pretty powerful. Thanks for sharing that. My gosh. Because, yeah, I mean, again, I don't know that everyone who's served in the military in that way would feel the same, but he was at a place where he needed to hear that, you know. I can't imagine. I mean, if I was of draft age during the Vietnam War, which I wasn't, I was not quite there yet, I would have been a conscientious objector. I would have never wanted to do that. But imagine people that, did go there to Vietnam or to all these other wars that have happened since then that are still going on now and had to been on the front line where your life is at stake and it's shoot or be shot, that's it. And you're just doing all these horrendous acts. And you need forgiveness. You've taken the lives of others. They can't forgive you. It has to come from somewhere. And how powerful for someone to see that in him and to be able to convey that. You know, yeah, because the thank you for your service always, it always kind of got me. I don't know. I wasn't really sure what to make out of all of that because it's like thank you for killing for me. It's a little weird, when you tell people that. I know they mean more than that. They're not just talking about the people who've taken lives for the country, for the freedom of everyone here in the United States or whatever. But there, it still comes off a bit kind of weird. Like, I'm glad that you were willing to go to the front line and shoot somebody so I could be happy at home or whatever. I don't know. It's a very strange concept. But thank you for sharing that. That's very powerful. Okay, that might not be something we're going to necessarily just start throwing out to anybody who we know has been in the military, but maybe having a conversation, this is what people need to hear. And maybe they need to hear that from more citizens that are saying, I forgive you for what you did in our name, for what you did, with this idea of protecting freedom in this country, because it's not a good thing. Wow. Okay. Let's do a little bit more of the slides. And if there's any further comments, please, let me know. But I wanted to share just a few quotes that are also on the handout. This is from the Dhammapada, the very beginning of the Dhammapada, the sayings of the Buddha, which there is a Tibetan version of it, but it's mainly taught in the Theravadan tradition. He abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those carrying on like this, hatred does not end. Just kind of showing how resentment, just keeps our hatred going. We're just stewing in a pot of hatred. He abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those not carrying on like this, hatred ends. Then right after it, there's that wonderful quote about, I'll use Jack Cornfield's version of it. Hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal truth. And so that's the whole point of what we've been talking about is from the very beginning when we define forgiveness is it's letting go of that burning coal, that hatred within ourselves. That is so important. That is such a major part of the healing is that when we've been able to recognize that we're never going to get rid of our hatred by stewing in it. It's just exacerbating the problem. It's just making it fester more, keeping the wound open and unhealed. So forgiveness is the alternative to that. In terms of is forgiveness something you do for yourself, for others, or for both yourself and others? I've already touched on this a little bit. Jack Cornfield points it out quite clearly. He says, consider the dialogue between two former prisoners of war. Have you forgiven your captors yet? Says one. No, never, says the other. Well, then they still have you in prison, don't they? We begin the work of forgiveness primarily for ourselves. I'm not saying it's totally for ourselves, but that's where it starts, is we recognize we're the prisoners of our own hatred. We're the prisoners of our own resentment towards whoever it is who has done something negative to us. And don't we want to be free of those shackles, once and for all? When you hold resentment toward another, you are bound to that person or condition by an emotional link that is stronger than steel. Forgiveness is the only way to dissolve that link and get free. I don't know this woman, Catherine Ponder. She's an inspirational writer and Unity Church minister. But I like what she says, because really this gets at it, this idea of being bound, or the chains that were mentioned earlier. We're bound to that person with this emotional link, and we're going to keep it there in place until we dissolve it with forgiveness. Here I want to share a wonderful story about Anthony Ray Hinton. I think I've shared this also with all of you. Some of these stories I share when I teach on the 8 pillars of joy, which forgiveness is one of them. That's from the Book of Joy by His Holiness and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Anthony Ray Hinton is an interesting guy. He spent 30 years on death row. Can you imagine 30 years on death? Think about what you were doing 30 years ago. And if you were in prison from then until now. Anyway, he was falsely accused of a robbery in Alabama. Black man, of course. There's tremendous racism still in the South, as there was then, not across the board, but still, it's, place where you can find that often in police and justice systems and what have you. So he was taken to court and tried, and even though he had proof, absolute proof, that he was at work in a locked building at the time when the crime was committed, because there was a white witness who said he was there, he was convicted and ended up on death row, and eventually got his appeal through and was released. So I'm going to share with you here. I need to, I'll share my Kindle thing, but I'm going to have to change the books, because I had Edith Eva Eger's book there. Go back to, whoops, that's not what I want to do there. Go back to my library, cancel, and there it is. The Sun Does Shine. This is his book, where wonderful biography, and kind of sad at times because of all that he had to go through, but really quite inspiring in terms of how his life was as he came out of prison and worked with being back in the world. He says, since my release, not one prosecutor or state attorney general or anyone having anything to do with my conviction has apologized. I doubt they ever will. And of course, if you're not getting an apology, it's almost like an invitation to hold on to your hatred, right? To not forgive. And he goes on to say, I forgive them. I made a choice after those first difficult weeks, when he was first in prison and and all this. He says, I chose to forgive. I chose to stay vigilant to any signs of anger or hate in my heart. They took 30 years of my life. If I couldn't forgive, if I couldn't feel joy, that would be like giving them the rest of my life. Apparently, he said the same thing when he was interviewed on 60 Minutes. He just said, I can't let them keep me in prison the rest of my life. He's free from prison now. Why would he hold on to those chains and that anger and that resentment towards the people who put him there? That episode is gone. It's done now. More important to be free completely. He talks about how, like, in the prison, he had like 1 hour where he was with other people. The rest of the time he was in his solitary cell. And he said, he never got time to go outside. He would go outside now, and he just, like, it's raining, he just loves to feel the raindrops on his face, because it's just a sign of his freedom. It just reinforces this idea of, who he is now and his newfound freedom. And he's become a man who helps work for the justice of others who are wrongly imprisoned on death row. Another reason why, going back to the capital punishment thing, why it's not a good idea, because a lot of innocent people are executed in this country. And many of the people on death row have been released when further evidence has been brought to bear on their cases. And of course, with DNA evidence and so many things that weren't there 30, 40 years ago, or weren't used 30, 40 years ago, there's a lot more, meat to be put behind some of these cases, having a good look over rather than just executing people. It's sad to say that this administration is hell-bent on, having more of these sorts of executions rather than less. But Anyway, enough of my political commentary. An issue I feel somewhat passionate about. I wish I did more about it, but anyway. Okay, we're coming down to our last few things. I want to share just a few little points, and then we can see if anyone else has anything they'd like to share. How do I extend forgiveness? I already went through this to some degree. This is on the sheet. This is very similar to what we had seen for the other ones. Don't start with those things that are really hard to forgive. Recognize your own imperfections and kind of use that understanding to give compassion and hold the other person in that light. Don't force it or take on more than you can handle. Work with what you can forgive now. Be mindful of whatever feelings arise, in your heart, in your thoughts in your mind, sensations in your body. Should the practice awaken any hurt from the past, gently soften into that pain within a space of compassion and loving kindness for yourself and others. I mean, you might even do Tonglen at that point. Most of you know the practice of Tonglen. If you're recognizing kind of the hurt that you still feel as you're trying to generate thoughts of forgiveness towards the other party, well, then recognize that you're not alone in those sorts of feelings of pain and hurt. Every one of us has been hurt by another, and we can think about others who've been hurt in similar ways. And we can maybe generate some of that wish of taking on their pain and their suffering, at least so that they don't have to experience it. We will endure whatever we have. We will live with that pain and hope that others can be free from it, and others who have not yet experienced it don't have to experience it. Again, there's a lot of things that we can do from our other Buddhist practices that can enrich our our meditation as well. Engage in it as best as you can, recognizing once more that simply having the willingness to engage in forgiving others is where your practice begins. Just to say, okay, I'm going to try this on. I'm going to see what it feels like to not hold on to this hot coal forever, to at least be able to look at it. Maybe I can't let go of it immediately, but I will, take that chance of finding a new way to work with it. For another practice of forgiveness, see the Fourfold Path of Forgiveness from the Book of Forgiving by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Mpho Tutu. It's his daughter. I gave you a copy of that. That is one of the other handouts that John kindly passed on to Sarah, and that we're going out with the Big Love email. These are some words I got from excuse me, I'm losing my voice now. From that website at the bottom, Chasing Dragonflies blog, somebody put together this fourfold with their own words, and I like the summary that they did. I'm not saying that this is a process that I would use. Telling your story is a little bit of kind of putting forward the pain that you are going through, expressing it to another. Maybe it isn't to the person who has harmed you. It's at least being able to kind of have someone bear witness to what it is that you have endured. And then the second one is also a bit of that process, but on a more emotional basis, naming the hurt, that we actually acknowledge the feelings that we have, the grief we're experiencing, the loss, whatever it is that is going on for us. He, has those two steps, which I think doing that with someone who's very close to you, who you trust, someone who can be there as, again, a witness to your pain, to what has occurred to you, can be beneficial. But watch my concern about those first two steps is once more not wallowing it or not making it become too much of poor me, I'm such a victim, da 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 da. It's good to acknowledge how we have been a quote victim to someone else's actions. But in Buddhist terms, that victimhood is only relational. We have also done things that have harmed that other being where they wouldn't be harming us, as I explained in the first session when we talk about karma and interdependence being a part of our understanding of forgiveness. So don't let that become too much of like, oh, this person was all wrong and I'm this perfect person who just happened to be, hurt. I'm innocent and they're guilty. And we have to kind of be careful of that. But nonetheless, many people find that a useful part, especially if you're dealing with very serious losses. The third step, the granting of forgiveness, is a bit of the process that we've been talking about. That third level tonight that we went into. That may take some time to get to a place where we can say that to the other person, if that is even a possibility. And then fourth, renewing or releasing the relationship, as I've alluded to a couple of times tonight. That may or may not be a possibility to renew the relationship. So we might have to release it. We might have to relinquish it and say, no, I'm not going to be engaging with you in any way in the future, even though I forgive you. So you can read that through. I don't know that I need to go through all the words of that, but they put a lot of effort into their book. Their book is really quite nice. The Book of Forgiving. It is maybe at times a little more from a Christian point of view because Archbishop Desmond Tutu has roots in the Anglican Church and what have you. So he has definitely that perspective. But I think it fits nicely. And when the two of them were in the Book of Joy talking about forgiveness, you could see that there are many great parallels between the thinking in both of them. Of course, as I mentioned in the first session, in Buddhism, you don't have to be forgiven by God because we don't have a creator God who created you. So you do have maybe that angle. Um, the Archbishop and his daughter do talk about these different levels of forgiveness at the end of this as well, forgiving yourself and so on. So there is a little bit of that, not quite identical to what Jack Kornfield does, but it's a nice little book that you may find helpful from that perspective. Because I know some people do have roots in both, Buddhism and Christianity, and I have my own, Christian roots that I think of frequently. So maybe one of the last questions we'll entertain, is there any act that is unforgivable? Think about it. I mean, is there anything that any being has done that there is no room for forgiveness? I mean, maybe some people will say yes. Maybe some people like Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or whoever, that have done horrendous, heinous things to other sentient beings, other human beings, that these are unforgivable. But Alan Locos, he's a Zen writer, I believe. He says, consider the possibility, and I am only saying consider the possibility, that maybe nothing is unforgivable. Maybe there's a way to find forgiveness, even for what we believed for so long to be unforgivable. Explore this mindfully. And maybe that's a good question to leave people with in some regard, is to acknowledge that that isn't an easy question to answer. Is there anything that's unforgivable? Because maybe once more, our lives have been relatively charmed and we've never had anything hit us in that way that some people have had, like the story of the mother whose son was killed or whatever. I mean, if you're dealing with that type of grief and loss, I can imagine that all sorts of other thoughts open up as in the realm of possibility, that in a normal everyday thing, when you're only seeing that on TV or in a movie or whatever, you don't really think much of it. But when those things hit home to you, maybe it does feel like some things couldn't be forgiven. But I would encourage you to examine that and to work with the Buddhist principles that speak to the fact that once more, change is possible. And even if change doesn't happen in this life, we're planting seeds by being forgiving to others for them to perhaps be more understanding and forgiving in the future. Yeah, Eloise, were you going to share something?
Yeah, because, well, I think that we have to go back to the distinguishing between the act and the person. That there may be acts that are forgivable, but that doesn't mean the person isn't.
Right, right. I don't remember. Did I have the question worded as acts or person?
It's acts.
Oh, sorry. It should have been person.
So,
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for pointing that out. I'll have to change that for the future because, yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, again, we can say definitely these actions are to be not condoned and not repeated, and they can be, condemned. But when it comes to the person, there is forgiveness. That's kind of how I meant it, but I'm sorry. Yeah, I've had that wording there wrong for a while. Wow, thanks for catching that for me, Eloise. I think we do need to apply that same understanding, dividing the person and their actions, as you pointed out. Yeah, Stella, did you want to share something? Oh, still have to unmute. You can also hold down your
Okay,
there.
oh, here I am. So, if somebody's hurt you in the past
Mhm.
and you never forgave them because you hadn't heard these teachings, right, or whatever, um, and they have passed away, is it good to forgive them in your mind, or when you do your practice? Is it good to forgive? I mean, is it still valid?
Absolutely. Because again, as was pointed out, the primary person we do forgiveness for is ourselves, at least initially. And because the other person isn't there as a party that we could extend that forgiveness to, it doesn't mean there's no benefit. It means the benefit we still will accrue in letting go of our own feelings of anger or resentment that we might be carrying with us. So absolutely, absolutely, you know, and that may be even when someone has passed away, especially if it's someone who has harmed us greatly, there might even be an ease of forgiving that isn't there when they're still alive, because when they're still alive, there's always that feeling like you need to do another step of going back to them and in person extending that, which can be very healing, but can also be very, very difficult for people if they've been harmed greatly by that other person. But, you know, if that person is gone, there's still great benefit to working with forgiveness in your heart. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stella. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments? Let's go back. I think I may have a closing comment or two on the slides. Making forgiveness your life's practice, I think is what it said. Yeah. How do I sustain and grow this practice of forgiveness? All major religious traditions, His Holiness says, carry basically the same message. That is love, compassion, and forgiveness. The important thing is that they should be part of our daily lives. Again, that to the extent that we can engage in this, maybe we don't feel like every day we have something we need to work on forgiving ourselves or others for, or what have you. But we're probably stepping in things pretty regularly. And so I think this is part of our daily practice, is to have some time for forgiveness, just like every day most of you have some time where you engage in your purification practice. You know, it should be something you do on a regular basis. Desmond Tutu and his daughter again say in their book, forgiveness, like any other quality, compassion, kindness, or generosity, must be fostered and developed. The ability to forgive is innate, but like any natural talent, it is perfected with practice. I think we do have that, you know, maybe within us, the seed of forgiveness. Maybe not everybody experiences it and develops it, but it has to be grown. It has to be something that we nurture so that that comes forward when we do have others who harm us or when we harm others. And then Gina Sharp, who I mentioned way back in the first class, I believe, who did a little course on forgiveness that I listened to online, says, so I encourage you to just continue to practice daily if this is a practice that feels right to you, to continue to know what it feels like to meet resistances, to meet the resentments, to meet the anger, to meet the feelings of vengeance with an open and compassionate heart. Okay, good enough. And I went right to 7:30, 7:31. So any final comments or questions? Anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity to teach on this, and I hope you all have good holidays, and that you're around folks that are all loving and kind, and no one saying anything mean or spiteful or anything. But if people do, maybe bring these teachings to mind, and maybe you can't forgive in the moment, but to recognize that we have tools we can work with. And in Buddhism in particular, an understanding that I think is really quite amazing. To go back to the very first class when I shared that I was in that little forgiveness panel with the different people, that sounds like the joke setup of the rabbi and the ex, minister and whatever, and the Buddhist teacher, and they all walk into a bar and forgive the bartender. I don't know, whatever. um, I think we can see that in Buddhism, there is a bit more room, in at least my estimation. I think all traditions teach forgiveness at some level. But I think we do have to, again, recognize some of the understanding that we can bring and use that in our practice of forgiveness. Use the understanding of the situation sentient beings are in, and being able to generate some compassion and love for them along with this forgiveness. So anyway, I wish you well with that practice. And is there anything else anyone needed to say? Okay. Um, we don't have the prayer list in front of us, but we can certainly think about all those beings who are on the prayer list, those who have illness, those who are dealing with obstacles, those who have died recently, and certainly all the beings that are on that list, that are on prayer lists around the world, the FPMT Prayers for the Dead list, which is a list that is kept of all those who have died. We can make strong prayers for all of those beings, as well as anyone else that we're holding in our hearts at this time who's going through difficulties. May all these beings find the peace that they seek, freedom from those sufferings, and all the causes that lead to true happiness through what we have done here tonight and through this course. Then let's dedicate with our usual prayers. So I'll put those on the screen and we can recite those together. All right. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then, as we recite the prayer for His Holiness, let's think about all of our other gurus, teachers who are in this world still. We want them all to have good health, to have very long lives, for all their amazing wishes to be fulfilled, so that we and others can continue to benefit from their guiding presence in this world. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then the prayer for Rinpoche's reincarnation to be identified very quickly, has taken rebirth apparently, and that being is yet to be identified. So we make strong prayers for that to happen with great auspiciousness, for him to be able, in that form of that young child, to be raised in a way that will be a benefit to unbelievable beings, and especially to the FPMT, our organization, so we can continue to be under the guidance of Rinpoche's amazing wisdom and compassion. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Well, thank you all for bearing with my kind of raw voice tonight. And I wish you all, again, a very safe, peaceful holiday season. Teachings resume in January with the dear Venerable Angie, who you all, most of you know, amazing being. And she's going to be in New Mexico for that month, and will be up in Taos, I think, the 2 last Thursdays of January, correct?
Right.
So I think
yes.
You guys start on January 8th again. So it'll be the 8th and 15th online, and then the 22nd and 29th with Venerable Angie in person. So enjoy your time with Venerable Angie. I'll get to see her here in Santa Fe while she's visiting. And then I will return in February. We'll have a few classes in February together. I will be traveling a little in February and March, but I will continue to do online teachings most of that time away. I've got actually 3 months where I will be with you, February, March, and April, doing a little course that's called Getting to Know Your Mind, that I hope you'll find enjoyable. It's kind of a way of looking at, as Venerable Rabina would often call them, our crazy roommates. Everything is kind of hanging out with us in our minds. Some of them that are a little more functional, but also gaining an appreciation for the ones we want to hang out with and the ones that we want to give the boot to. So anyway, that's the idea behind that course. Trying to keep it very practical. It's normally a more traditional kind of philosophical study, but I think it'll be a useful course for all of you, and I'll enjoy going through the material again. So. All right, thank you all again. I wish you all the best, and I'm so grateful that I can continue to have a wonderful relationship with all of you after so many years. I think it's 20 years now that I've been coming up to Taos. So I'm so grateful for all of you in my life, and I hope that, again, you have a good holiday season and all the best for the new year. So
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.
See you.
see you all soon. Be safe, everyone.
Hi, Laura. I saw Laura back there.
Hi, Stella. Wishing you
Stella,
happy
Diane.
holidays.
Happy
Mwah.
holiday to you. Mwah.
Mwah.
Always.